What a day we got. Thank you so much for being with us. Welcome to the Hard Count, the People's Show. For every single thing that you know and love about this beautiful sport, it starts here every single day. It ends here every single day. We're so glad to have you with us. However you're listening, whether you're listening at work, whether you're babysitting the kids and just turning a blind eye for just a few minutes, because Coach Brian Kelly is about to join the program. Thus the intro, what a day we got for you. Also, Nick Saban and Brian Kelly have both given their thoughts on SEC scheduling and how that's going to look in the future. How does that look, you ask? Well, I think perspective is everything. I'm going to talk that through. They both had different takes on it. Now, make no mistake, Brian Kelly was throwing no shade, but at the exact same time, he wants all the smoke when it comes to the Southeastern Conference. Spring is in the air. We've talked about it a couple times on this show. A lot of programs across the country have already gotten rolling. Some of these schools are somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 practices in. They only got basketball shorts and a helmet and a jersey on, but even so, what is being said right now across the country? Specifically in Gainesville, Florida and Austin, Texas, we've got some intel for you. I can't wait to talk it through with y'all. Also, would you draft Stetson Bennett? High risk, high reward, high ceiling, low floor, all that in a bag of chips. We got to talk that through, because I think Stetson Bennett is one of the most interesting draft prospects in this entire class. We'll talk it through right here, the pros, the cons, and all the in-between. At the end of this thing, you know how we do it. You join the show. Drop your questions in the live chat. We want to hear from you. We kind of go back and forth. Sometimes we'll go Twitter. Sometimes we'll go on the live chat on YouTube. Today we're going with the live chat. So get in there, give us a question, and we'll do our best to get through that at the end of the show. But like I said, we're so glad you're with us. A lot of different ways you could be spending your morning, and we're glad you're here with us talking some college football. Like I said, Brian Kelly about to join the program in just a few short minutes. Before we get to that conversation, though, I think we need to talk about what Nick Saban and Brian Kelly had to say about the future of scheduling in the Southeastern Conference. It's no secret, the SEC is changing their scheduling format. And the favorite in the clubhouse right now is somewhere in the range of a 9-game conference schedule, meaning, according to the reports, there will be 3 permanent opponents for every single SEC team within the conference. Now, most coaches are in favor of this. Nick Saban, we talked about it before on this show, is not crazy about the rumored draw for Alabama. Ross Dellinger put out a report that essentially had the 3 teams that these SEC teams would be paired with. Alabama drew LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn. And Nick Saban said, hey, I'm all in favor of conference games. You guys know that I'm in favor of conference games. We need to have competitive games, but how did you guys give us LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn? How is that our draw? That is an absolute gauntlet. And from his perspective, it's fair to say, put a pause on that. Brian Kelly, Ole Miss, Alabama, and A&M are who LSU draw, or who LSU drew, rather. So how do we unpack their response to this? Because like I said, Nick Saban wasn't thrilled about it. Brian Kelly is saying, I came to the SEC to play the best. I'm here for it. Let's roll. He also said, I don't think anybody's worried about Nick Saban being ready to play. Nick Saban, everyone's going to have their take on scheduling, but Nick Saban will be ready. And I think Brian Kelly is on the money in saying that. But let's just take a pause here. Like I said, if you're Nick Saban, how much longer are you going to coach for? Is it 10 years? Is it 5 years? I think the growing sentiment is Nick Saban is probably not going to coach for an extended period of time. I think we're coming to the end of his career. For Brian Kelly, he just got to the SEC, and it feels like to me he's still in prove-it mode. He's still got a lot of his naysayers, people saying he can't recruit well. Now he's got a top 5 class. People saying he's not a fit at LSU. They go to the SEC title game in his first year. He welcomes the smoke because he feels like he still has that chip on his shoulder, and people still aren't 100% certain of what their opinion is of Brian Kelly. I got more thoughts on this. But if you haven't yet subscribed, would love to have you at the party. We have had a ton of y'all join us here in the last few months, so thank you for that. And if you haven't yet subscribed and joined the party, no time like the present. Would love to have you here. Also, Make sure you're following me on Instagram and on Twitter at JD PicKell to stay up with everything that we're doing here. Like I said, perspective is everything. In the next 3 years, from Nick Saban's point of view, what he's saying is fair. Why did we draw LSU, Tennessee, and Auburn? How is the SEC giving us that? From a coach's perspective, I get that. Because LSU just won a national title in 2019. Auburn, they've played for 2 national titles and won one in like the last 15 or 20 years, even if they are down or coming off of a down era. And then Tennessee, the way that the SEC came up with these opponents, I'm sure there was some historic factor taken into account there, but for the most part, it was winning percentage of the last 10 years. And Tennessee was somewhere in the range of 40% win percentage. So they're in the bottom half of the SEC. Now, you and I both know, if we're thinking about this in real time, looking forward to, again, the next 3 years, Josh Heupel's got that thing rolling. Tennessee is a top 10 football team going forward. Tennessee is a sleeping giant that I think is just now starting to get woken up. So Nick Saban's saying, how did we get these 3 teams? Again, perspective is everything. If you're Nick Saban, your priorities are to win another national title and leave Alabama and the SEC in good position when you ride off into the sunset. Okay? These 3 teams for the next few years doesn't necessarily put those priorities in perfect position to get accomplished. You hear what I'm saying? Because LSU, I think they're going to be good as long as Brian Kelly's there. Same thing with Tennessee. Who knows about Auburn with Hugh Freeze? I think that's going to work. To what degree? Remains to be seen. For Brian Kelly, like I said, he's trying to prove himself. Now, he didn't draw the same draw that Nick Saban drew, if you're keeping up with me, in terms of teams that he has to play year in and year out. But for Brian Kelly, he's like, I'll take anybody and everybody. I'm ready to prove myself. So just different points in their career, and I think that's why you have different takes. Now, I've gone on this show before and said this. I think long term, I think Nick Saban's wrong. And I will say that very few times on this show. I will not make that a theme throughout the course of what we do here on the Hard Count. But I do not believe that Nick Saban is accurate in his assessment that this is going to somehow hurt Alabama long term. First, you got to protect these rivalries. I don't know how you take away LSU and Alabama. I don't know how we take that off the table. That makes no sense to me. You got to play that game every year. How do you take away the Iron Bowl on the 3rd Saturday in October? LSU, Tennessee, Auburn are absolutely the right teams for Alabama. The reason why I'm not feeling sorry for Alabama going forward is because we don't know, without a shadow of a doubt, that all 3 of those teams that they have set to play are going to be competitive in the future, in the next 15, 20, 100 years, because that's what this thing is for. This scheduling isn't going to change every 4 or 5 years. Now, with conference realignment, we'll keep an eye on how this could shift. But the thought process in putting these permanent opponents together is over the next 100 years, you're going to play these teams. What happens if Brian Kelly leaves for the NFL tomorrow? What happens to LSU? What happens to Tennessee if Josh Heupel were to leave tomorrow? I think football is cyclical at the collegiate level, and I think it's very much so head coach dependent. And all 3 of these teams, I think, are a head coach away from being in a different standing. It's not to say they'll be better or worse or anything. I'm just saying it's a huge question mark what they look like in 10 years. Same thing for Alabama, quite frankly. Who's to say what they look like after Nick Saban leaves? You hear what I'm saying here? So we're protecting the integrity of the game. We can't have it be specific to one coach or a couple seasons here or 10 seasons there. I get it. We got to take it into account. But for Alabama and Nick Saban, I don't think that they're going to be in too difficult of a position. And like Brian Kelly said with Nick Saban, he's going to be ready. Like, as much as he's telling you, hey, I don't like the way this shakes out, he's not complaining. He's objecting, but he's not saying that it's going to be too tough for Bama. Bama's going to be Bama, just to keep it a buck with you. Now, again, going back to perspective, that's Nick Saban's perspective. For Brian Kelly's perspective, I think what he's saying is on the money. And just how I said I think it's going to benefit Bama long term. Remember, the college football playoff is expanding. And what do we always talk about when it gets to November and we're talking about who's going to get in and who's going to be one of those last couple teams in with 4? When it gets to 12, we'll talk about this even more. Who did you play? Who are your quality wins, your quality losses, which is just a gross word to use, but we got to talk about it. The SEC is going to come up smelling like roses in that conversation. Because I would bet my bottom dollar, LSU, Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama, LSU, all those teams, they'll be within that top 25 range more often than not. A&M and Ole Miss, A&M's stockpiled with talent. Everyone wants to make a joke about A&M and what they did last year, but they're stocked in terms of talent, and Jimbo Fisher has shown he can win. Got a national title to prove it. Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, they're churning along. They're going to be fine when it comes to the end of the season and getting into the expanded playoff. So if I'm Brian Kelly, I'm saying, yeah, bring on all the SEC teams. Whoever we got to play, we'll play them. Because guess what? At the end of the year, if you have a 2-point loss to Alabama, if that is how you get down in your LSU, and that's your one blemish on your record, it's fine, right? It's fine. It's better than some of these teams have in terms of wins. So the resumes for these teams, as they play more conference games, this is going to help them. For Alabama and for Brian Kelly at LSU, it's going to help them. So I'm excited to watch how that plays out. The expanded playoff and the permanent opponents for the SEC, more conference games, will give them a better resume when all the dust settles on Selection Sunday. I 1,000% believe that. For Brian Kelly, though, there's a human party that just kind of loves him saying, we want all the smoke. Right? First year in the SEC last year. He's still new to this. I mean, Nick Saban's been through the gauntlet a time or two, so he's got a little bit more of a credentialing to him. Brian Kelly, people are still saying he's not a fit at LSU, which blows my mind after what he did last season. He's saying, bring on all the smoke. I'm more than willing to prove myself. Put me to the test. Any and every SEC team will play him. That's why I came here. I came here because I wanted to play the best and try to beat the best. We weren't able to do that at Notre Dame. That wasn't the way the schedule always shook out, being an independent in the FBS. So I love that for Brian Kelly. I love that for LSU. And this will be a whole lot of fun when it gets here. The SEC permanent scheduling will be something we keep on tracking. Again, there's the rumors about who these teams are going to potentially play. We say rumors because it's not solidified yet, but if Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated is reporting on it, there's a pretty good chance it's going to come to fruition. So we'll leave it at that. We got to sit down and talk to Brian Kelly, though, yesterday as they get started with spring football today. Asked him about how his team is going to be different from last year to this year. Asked him about the quarterback situation. Garrett Nussmeier, absolute dog. Jaden Daniels did a lot of really good things last year. Who's the starting quarterback heading into the year? He actually gave us an answer on that. So make sure you're tuned in and locked in for that one. But overall, Brian Kelly, we appreciate him spending time with us. Was a phenomenal interview, told us a lot about his football team. So without further ado, here's Coach Brian Kelly. We are now joined by the head coach of the LSU Tigers, Coach Brian Kelly. Coach, appreciate you making some time. How are we doing today?
Doing great. We get to talk football. It's always good instead of talking about everything else. So I always like to make time for these conversations.
Absolutely. We appreciate you making time. What has the focus been like for you since y'all finished up the bowl game and then got into winter conditioning? Like you said, about to start playing the game again in the spring.
Yeah, so obviously, as you can imagine, that December period was like juggling, three things at once. You wanted to get your signing period complete with your freshmen. Then you had the transfer portal. Obviously, that was very important. And you had to prepare your football team, certainly for your bowl games or playoffs or conference championships, whatever they may be. Once we're able to get through all that, the focus really then became 24s, 25s. And then when your team got back on campus, certainly your focus became your football team that was here. So we've been able to shift the gears, and now tomorrow we start our first spring practice. So you can imagine 24, 25s, junior days, trying to get ahead of that, and then now really focus on the guys that are on campus.
And when you look at 2022, I mean, you guys had a ton of success. It seemed like almost instantly. How were you able to do so much in year one at LSU?
Well, I think we got incredible buy-in. Look, I mean, this is a program that's had great success and certainly a couple of down years, but you had a lot of pride, a lot of tradition in the program. We just needed to recalibrate and set the standards where they needed to be So the standards were recalibrated, and we became very demanding, not demeaning, but certainly demanding, and the players wanted that. They come to LSU wanting to win championships. So we were able to get them to where those standards became much more familiar. Now it was a matter of consistency. We weren't as consistent as we would have liked, but we've set a really good foundation for where we want to go from year one to year two.
And personally, I mean, I've loved hearing you talking about that, just talking about the standards and structure and culture that you're bringing to LSU. What are those structures that you have in place for your football team?
Well, it's how you do things. It's how you think, first of all, your mindset. And that starts with habits. And, you got choices to make, right? You can be average at what you do. You can be good at what you do. You can be elite. And we want to be elite at what we do. And that's hard to be elite. It's really hard to do things the right way every day, not just some of the time, but all the time. And when I say elite, I'm talking about going to class, doing the little things the right way, getting sleep, eating the right way, being early to everything. And so all of those things, it takes a commitment to being elite, and that's hard, or everybody would do that. And so that's the process that these guys now have immersed themselves in. We had some bad habits, and so we've had to recreate those habits on a day-to-day basis, and they're working towards it. We're not there yet. This is not a finished product, and I don't know if it ever is, but we're working towards that every day.
But a really phenomenal product in 2022, playing for an SEC title, and that was nothing that was new to you in terms of success on the field with all the great things you did at Notre Dame. How would you say your style has adapted going from South Bend to Louisiana?
I think the process is very similar in terms of, building habits and consistency and way we do things. Recruiting is totally different down here in the sense that, you're much more engaged from the very beginning, which I love, right? I mean, I've had everybody over my house. I mean, I'm less than a mile from campus. I'm not in a plane, half the year. A long trip for me is up to Ruston, and that's a lot different than having to be on the West Coast and then, LA and then New Jersey and Texas. That's a hard road. And so you really get to build stronger relationships with the coaches, especially in the state of Louisiana, because you're going to be in that school every single year, and you build that relationship. And so recruiting is just different from that perspective. And I think you can build stronger relationships and a trust factor that allows you to get that young man to come to LSU.
And that's one thing I've heard you talk about extensively is, hey, we are going to recruit Louisiana well. I believe you signed somewhere in the range of double-digit guys from the boot. Why is that so important to you and your success at LSU?
Well, first and foremost, it's outstanding football. Look, if we didn't have the history and the players in this state, that's a stump speech, right? It sounds good. But there are players here in the state of Louisiana, and there are a lot of good players that have left this state that are playing against us. So to me, it became we need to pull our base, and we need to do a better job in the state of Louisiana first and foremost, and then we'll spread out. I mean, the contiguous states are great states. Obviously, Texas and, obviously Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida are all great states for us, but we need to pull Louisiana first and foremost. So it was an effort that I thought we needed to make. You can see that in the tenor relative to who I hired amongst my staff. They have roots here in the state of Louisiana, and we backed it up that way.
And we're looking forward to this year's team. Winter conditioning is sort of like that dues paying period of the college football calendar where there's not a lot of glitz and glamour. There's not a lot of hype videos going on. Who impressed you in terms of this winter conditioning phase within your locker room currently?
I think some of our freshman defensive linemen, came in and were pretty impressive. You never know. Defensive linemen, it's one of those things that they, certainly have the measurables, but how are they going to stack up? Paxton Howard, Deshaun Womack, both of those guys early on have the look that they have certainly the ability to compete right away. We'll see here over the next couple of weeks in spring practice, when we put the pads on, but they certainly have a look. Javion Toviano, as a defensive back, certainly has that athletic ability and the way he handles himself. I think, Yates, the defensive back from Texas, these guys are elite athletes, and you can see it in their confidence level is really high as well. And those guys really kind of stand out to me from a defensive perspective, that they have a chance to come in and at least show themselves in the spring so we can evaluate them clearly as to whether they're ready to play or not.
And looking on the offensive side of the ball, two, from the outside looking in at least, really good options at quarterback with Garrett Nussmeier and Jaden Daniels. How is your staff going to approach that quarterback room during the spring?
Well, I think first and foremost, the improvement level, was great for Jaden Daniels. And he also saw that he could get better here at LSU. And so we're grateful that he feels that way and that he has the opinion that he has things to work on as well, right? It takes two to work together in this situation. So this spring, but before this spring, he saw the need to really work on some things in film study and understanding, his progressions. Now he gets to go on the field and put those things together. He made progress, as we talked about, but I think we got to see him push the ball down the field, be a little bit more aggressive. And those are the things he'll get a chance to work on. Garrett Nussmeier, we got a chance to see him in the SEC championship game. He's a guy that can do a lot of things. We need to keep an open mind. We got to give him some work with the first team as well as we continue to develop him because certainly he has the tools as well. So, Jaden's our starter. But Garrett Nussmeier needs to continue to grow, and you can't grow if you're just getting second team reps. You've got to be able to give him an opportunity to go out there and show himself as well.
And one guy who seemed like he took on a ton of growth in 2022 was Harold Perkins. What was the reason for him having such a strong back half of the season? And then what are your expectations for him heading into spring football in 2023?
Well, he's an elite athlete, certainly. And I think he takes care of himself. He's a guy that sleeps and eats and does all the right things away from the football center as well. And that's going to be more and more important as we go through and we add playoffs in 24. You're talking about 16, 17 game schedules. The guys that don't take care of themselves, they're going to break down later in the season. And Harold Perkins is a guy that took care of himself and was able to kind of slingshot himself later in the season into playing really good football as well. The second point to that is Matt House did a great job of moving him around and putting him in positions to be successful. So, one, you get great athletes, right? But two, you got to put them in positions to succeed. And I think both of those things happened with Harold Perkins.
Tasmanian Devil, he was must-see TV on the defensive side of the football. So every Saturday I was keeping my eyes on 40, which is a whole lot of fun. Coach, when you look to 2023, what is the biggest change you're expecting from your team going into your second year at LSU?
I think we're going to have a little bit more depth. I think that was really evident that, as the season went on, we were certainly taxed in many areas. I think it showed itself particularly on the defensive side of the ball. We just did not have the numbers. And as the story is well chronicled. We had about 38, 39 scholarship players. It is what it is, right? But that started to show itself later in the season, not having the kind of depth that we had. So having more depth is going to be an enhanced special teams units. It's going to allow us to obviously get guys in and out of games and be fresher as we get into the later portion of our season, because we weren't as consistent as I would have liked later in the season.
Coach, you have been around the game and seen a ton of different things throughout college football. But from the outside looking in, it just seems like LSU is just a little bit different than maybe any other program in the country. What makes LSU, in your mind, such a special place?
Well, I think, first of all, it is a part of the country where football is just revered. And it starts at the high school ranks where kids grow up and they just want to play for LSU. I mean, it's a flagship. I think there's only a couple of state universities, maybe Ohio State's one of them, LSU. There's only a few in the country where there is that incredible connection with their state and the flagship university and the game of football. I think secondly, the great tradition of LSU football, national championships, but guys in the NFL. I think that connection. And I think finally, the venue where college football is played. Tiger Stadium is unlike many places. And I think that was seen. Look, really does the hype ever live up to what it really is? And for me, being in it for 3 decades, I thought it was the hype, but the Alabama LSU game lived up to the hype. I mean, the atmosphere, just the feeling in that stadium is quite unique. It is like nothing I've ever experienced. So I think the stadium, the state, football itself, you got to throw the food in there too. I mean, the food's amazing. I mean, come on. It's like nothing else. I think you put all those things together, it makes it pretty unique down here in Baton Rouge.
Without a doubt. Well, Coach, we appreciate you making time. Excited to watch y'all get after it in the spring, and definitely have plans to make it down to Death Valley at some point and sample the football as well as the food. But appreciate your time.
And the tailgating. You got to tailgate, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Coach.
We appreciate Coach Kelly joining us. How about that? Tigers starting spring practice today. Jaden Daniels going to be the starter. Garrett Nussmeier getting some reps with the ones. But I am very, very intrigued to see what LSU does for an encore in 2023. A lot of people putting massive expectations on the Tigers. Just give it time. Coach Kelly's got a process, like you heard him talk about. Heard about structure and what they're going to do over an extended period of time. So if they don't win the SEC title in 2023, I would not get overly concerned. There's a lot of good things going on under the hood and going on from a process standpoint in Baton Rouge. Now, the Tigers, not the only team getting spring football on and popping. There have been a couple of programs, 2 specifically I really want to hone in on, that have had a couple of practices now under their belt. Now, full disclaimer here. Texas and Florida have had practices where they're running around in helmets and a jersey and basketball shorts. So do you read super deeply into this? The answer is absolutely. We're college football fans. Of course we read deeply into this, but just want to make sure that I mention it's not full go 11-on-11 tackle to the ground as we're going to get a little bit later in the spring. But the Florida Gators and the Texas Longhorns are getting spring football rolling. They've had spring football rolling. Like I just mentioned, we got to talk about the intel that we've gotten from the good people that we know close to those programs. Let's start with Florida. It's no secret. The biggest storyline surrounding their spring practice is what's going on with Graham Mertz. Transferred from Wisconsin, was really highly recruited out of high school and sort of underachieved, if you will, in relative to expectations. I'm sure his own expectations as well at Wisconsin. Now looking for a fresh start, has a chance to win the starting quarterback job at Florida. And the early reports through a few practices with him is the coaching staff, all the coaches, have been really impressed with his grasp of the playbook. Because remember, he's only been on practice 2, practice 3, and he's only been on campus for like 15 minutes. Okay? He just figured out where all his classes are and where he lives at. So the fact that he's hitting the ground running, grasping the playbook, and able to compete this spring for that QB1 spot, I think is a very, very big deal. Also worth noting, they have been impressed with the way that he has attacked the work. And you say, yeah, okay, he's a quarterback. He should attack the work. You should be a guy who's, first in, last out kind of mentality. That should be your approach, right? Well, yes, but the reason why that's so important for Graham Mertz is because he is trying to not just win a position, he's trying to win over a locker room. Like, it's much more than just winning a position when you're the quarterback. You got to have the full support of your offensive line, your skill positions. Everybody has to believe in you because you are the coolest hand in the stadium on 4th and 1, or you need to be. You got to have some belief. Got to have your teammates bought into who you are. And you earn that kind of respect. You earn that kind of belief during spring practice. Because remember, Jack Miller, he's been there now for a year. His teammates know who Jack Miller is. There's no questioning about what he's bringing to the table, all right? They know he's a grinder. He's going to get in there and work. Graham Mertz following suit, going about his business, and attacking the work the way he is. I think that's going to pay dividends for them in the long term. Andy Jean, early enrollee freshman wide receiver. It's early. It's very early, but they're excited about him in Gainesville. The reason why this is a big deal, you need playmakers at Florida. You need playmakers, especially on the outside, because of what you have in the backfield. You have two of the best young running backs in the entire country in Trevor Etienne and Montrell Johnson. Those dudes will tote the rock for you, okay? Both over 5.5 yards a carry last season. What I'm trying to tell you is that's great you can run the football. That's great you have guys that can, carry the mail for you. That's important. But that will only get you so far if you're one-dimensional, especially in the SEC, man. They play in the trenches in the SEC. They play big boy football in the SEC. If you don't have some sort of counterpunch off of running the football, you're only going to get so far. Yeah, you'll be bowl eligible. You probably make, 6 or 7 win season. That's great. But to get where they expect to go, to get to the standard in Gainesville, or what the standard has been over a longer period of time at Florida, you need to have multiple weapons. So Andy Jean, he's only a freshman, similar to Graham Mertz. He's been on campus for like a cup of coffee. But the fact that he's had success and turned heads this early on, you can spot great right away, right? And it sounds like the good folks close to Gainesville keeping a closer eye on Andy Jean for that reason. Had one person tell me close to the program, he reminds him of a young Van Jefferson. So high praise. High praise for Andy Jean. If he can get acclimated and be a weapon for them on the outside and add something for them in terms of the pass game with Graham Mertz potentially, if he wins that quarterback job, that would be enormous. That would be enormous for Florida and what they want to do long term. If you haven't yet subscribed, we'd love to have you part of this operation. Spring intel going on right now. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We got a lot more practice notes to get into, have a lot more people to talk to at other programs across the country. It's going to be a lot of fun. Like I said, I don't care what the groundhog says. I don't care what the calendar says. Spring has sprung. Spring football is here. Okay? College basketball season is about to start, if you ask me. Trahaja Mitchell from Ohio State, the linebacker, is obviously a transfer into the University of Florida, and they're really impressed with the way that he has taken on control of the defense. He's already making defensive calls. Now, why is that important? Last season, Ventrell Miller was, how I like to say, the Wi-Fi of the defense. Gets the signal in, gets everybody connected, everybody on the same page. All right, that's how Ventrell Miller impacted the defense last year. And you remember, there were times where he was hurt. He wasn't able to be full go. He wasn't able to play in every single game. And the reason why that's important is because when he wasn't on the field, you saw them get beat at times, not just because of personnel, because they didn't have the right alignment. They weren't all on the same page. Their Wi-Fi, their reception was just a little bit funky. So for Trahaja Mitchell to be taking on this role so far in spring, again, being a transfer and not having been on campus long, that's a really good sign. We're not going to say it's an absolute that he's just going to be your go-to guy for the entirety of the season, but right now the early returns are he's going to be able to get you lined up. He's taken on that Wi-Fi role, if you will. Also a really good player. Did a lot of really good things at Ohio State. You can go and turn on the tape. Let's shift gears here. Jump on a flight. Let's get out to Austin, Texas. The 40 acres, a school and a spring practice that has been widely covered by folks that don't even necessarily cover our game typically. We'll go ahead and throw the @ out there. Adam Schefter wrote an article talking about the Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning quarterback derby. I'm not going to talk about that battle a lot because we've done it extensively on other shows. I'll just say this. There is not a quarterback battle in Austin, Texas between Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning. That's not to say there is not still a spirit of competition in that quarterback room. I'll leave it at that. Other practice notes. The good folks at Inside Texas are doing a phenomenal job covering this. They have a YouTube channel, the Texas On 3 site, Inside Texas also has a ton of other spring practice notes, so get a membership over there, lock it in over there. They have been really impressed with how physically imposing this Texas team looks taking the field in the spring. And it's just sort of the eye test, but to be able to look a little bit more physically imposing, to look a little bit stronger, I mean, that's a very good sign because think about who Texas wants to be. At their core, Texas wants to be a run-first football team and stop the run. We'll start with running the football. It's an RPO offense, meaning we're going to pass off of the run. But Bijan Robinson, he's gone to the league. Roshan Johnson, gone to the league. Two guys that are going to be studs for some ball club. But Texas, their whole system is predicated on getting 3 or 4 yards with the inside zone, then throwing off of it when your linebackers creep up, your safeties creep up. So having some sort of physicality about you in the trenches and running the football, It's a very big deal. That's how you set the table. Doesn't mean the meal is going to be phenomenal, but it's how you set the table, how you get things started running the rock. On the flip side of things, stopping the run. Steve Sarkisian said we've got a lot more confidence being able to do that right now. But again, going back to size, going back to being a little bit more physically imposing, that's like the price of admission. Okay, you can be speedy. That's important. Obviously, you got to be able to eat up angles and be able to play in space. Like, that's important. But big human beings moving other big human beings is like stopping the run 101. And they did that well last year, but to see that they are continuing to progress physically is going to equip them even more so to do that well this coming season. And I'll just say this, we don't want to read overall too much into this, but tough teams play big games in November, December. Like, that's just the way that it is. Look at Michigan, look at Georgia, heck, look at TCU, look at Ohio State. Ohio State, I think, was tough the majority of the year outside of the Michigan game. Tough physical teams, big body, hard body teams play big games at the end of the year. So the fact that Texas is sort of checking that box in the spring can only, check a box that's in front of you, and that's the box that's in front of them. So I'm encouraged by that for Texas. Some guys that have stood out. Savion Red was a receiver last year for Texas. He is playing running back right now in the spring. And 2 practices in, the coaching staff has spoken really highly of him, have highlighted him in their post-practice press conferences. It looks like beefed up right around 10 pounds. ESPN had him at like 205 pounds last season. The Texas website right now has him at like 215. So bulked up a little bit. You would imagine to maybe get some carries. There's going to be carries to be had in that room with Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson both leaving, so a fair amount of production. The fact that he's a former wide receiver gives you some excitement because he can be flexible for you with what you do offensively. He can catch passes naturally. He's looked really good in one-on-ones, according to the people at Inside Texas, when it comes to him on a linebacker. Like, that's a mismatch you can take advantage of. Another thing that Texas wants to do. How many times did we see them put Bijan Robinson out in the slot and throw him a vertical route? That's a luxury not a lot of teams have. So Savion Red making that transition and making that transition relatively smoothly so far, it's a good sign for the people at Texas. We'll see what happens, but very excited on his progress right now and what he can bring to the table for them offensively. 3 wide receivers we got to talk about. We'll start with 2 newcomers. Jonte Cook has looked crisp. Bobby Burton watched practice the other day and said there was a routes on air period where Quinn Ewers threw, I believe it was an outbreaking route to Xavier Worthy. Again, just on air, but it said it looked really crisp. Right after that, the next 2 players in line to throw that route and execute that drill were Arch Manning, and then you had Jonte Cook. And Bobby Burton said you couldn't really tell too much of a difference in terms of skill level or quickness or comfortability, and it's just 1 rep. It's on air. There's no defense, but the eye test is telling. All right, and for Jonte Cook to look like he's stride for stride with what Xavier Worthy is doing during routes on air, read into that as much as you want. I'm just saying that's a good sign. My guy's been through winter conditioning now and just got onto campus and is sort of getting his feet wet, but to look crisp and look comfortable and be more or less a standout to this point during spring practice, that's a very good sign. Jonte Cook looking good out there. A.D. Mitchell, receiver, transferred from Georgia. They said he just looks like he's built a little bit differently physically, a little bit more muscly, a little bit more of a put-together lower body. The reason why that's important, what Texas did a lot last year was work the perimeter with their receiving core. They got the ball out in space and let those dudes get to work on bubbles and quick screens and smoke screens. And the reason why this is crucial for A.D. Mitchell to have a little bit more oomph to him physically, you got to block on the edge. Like Jordan Whittington put a dude in the dirt in the Red River rivalry, and that to me was like, all right, Texas has kind of got an edge now. To be able to have the physicality to do that, and for A.D. Mitchell to be put together to do that, that's a good sign, all right? So we'll see how this progresses. We know what we're getting in A.D. Mitchell in terms of what he does going up and winning contested catches and winning one-on-one. Like, he's going to be a guy for you in the pass game. I'm excited to see him block. I'm excited for that first pass play where they get it out to Xavier Worthy in the slot or Jonte Cook in the slot and A.D. Mitchell's outside just cracking down on a safety or pushing over a corner. That's going to be a lot of fun. You got to be physical at all levels, not just the offensive line, but your skill players as well. And A.D. Mitchell is put together in order to do that. It's a good sign on the 40 acres. Read into it as you will. We're a couple practices in, but it's a good sign on the 40 acres. And then finally, Xavier Worthy, you know what you're getting in him. Out there rocking the number 1. You know what you're going to get with him. It's going to be special. Handling punt return duties, it looks like right now. But the thing that's interesting to me, or encouraging rather, first out there to practice. Okay, your best players working the hardest is what leads good football teams. It's no secret. Culture is a thing that we talk about a lot with Texas. And you can have the right coaching staff, you can say the right things, you can have the right things plastered across the wall in your weight room, but unless it's player-led, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So Xavier Worthy, don't think it's really a debate. The best player on Texas' football team, leading the charge, getting out there early, setting the tone. I think it's a good sign for Texas. So that's Texas, that's Florida. We're excited to watch both these programs throughout spring, but that's a little bit of spring intel for you. We got more notes. We got more to be talked about. Go ahead and get a membership to Gators Online to keep up with everything Florida spring football. Get a membership to Inside Texas. Both of these organizations are under the On3 umbrella. They do the best job in the industry covering these respective programs. All right, so lock it in over there. Spring football is here, man. Spring football has sprung. I say it all the time. I don't care about a groundhog. I don't care what the calendar says. Spring football is here. Now, the NFL draft, it's getting rolling here pretty quick. We've kind of gone through the underwear Olympics. We've had different scouting reports out there for where this guy should be drafted and different mock drafts, all that. You know one guy that maybe isn't getting talked about enough that I think we need to have a discussion about? Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett is one of the most intriguing prospects in this entire class. Forget just quarterback. How about just this entire class? There's a projected grade on him, per the experts, right around the 4th round. And the draft is based in, to my understanding, science. That's the reason why we're having Will Levis shoot up draft boards, or why Anthony Richardson is making scouts salivate, because of what you can physically see, measure, and account for. Scientifically, that projects well. Okay, I don't know that either of those guys put together a better season than Stetson Bennett. Now, I'm not saying I take him before Stetson Bennett, but I'm just saying the draft sometimes is counterintuitive to what we saw on the field. And Stetson Bennett, to me, is like that one friend that everybody had, and during graduation, you're having a conversation with them, and you're just not sure what you're going to get with them after graduation. You would not be surprised if they went and ran a Fortune 500 company. You wouldn't be surprised if they ended up on their mom's couch for the next 5 years. Like the extremes for what they could achieve and what they may achieve or may not achieve are pretty high, right? That's kind of how it feels about Stetson Bennett. You could sell me on the fact that he may end up being a long-term starter in the NFL and have a really good career. You could also convince me that, hey, he may not be in the league in the next 2 years. A lot of, high highs and low lows. More thoughts on this, but really quickly, make sure you're subscribed. Got a lot to talk about. We talk exclusively college football. Stetson Bennett, I wholeheartedly believe, is still one of college football's very own, because he hasn't yet taken a snap in the NFL or gotten drafted by an NFL team. So until that happens, we're still claiming Stetson Bennett for the college football community. All right? Now, like I said, the pros and the cons, the highs and the lows, we got to measure those for Stetson Bennett. The cons are fairly obvious. There's a lot of other quarterbacks with more tools. He's only 5'11", was a walk-on, nothing really elite that jumps off the tape when you watch Stetson Bennett, or rather, let me rephrase that. Nothing really elite when you look at Stetson Bennett from a combine perspective. Does some really good things on tape. We'll get to that. But when it comes to the cons, a lot of them are scientific, fairly obvious, not much more to talk about. The thing that he didn't do that, or the thing that he did rather, that didn't help himself was getting arrested before the draft process. That hurts. That's tough, man. Like, you're already undersized. You already have the walk-on label. There's already enough people that have something to say about you, and now you give them a little bit more fuel to that fire. Now, I personally don't have a ton of concern about that for Stetson Bennett. Really a one-time thing from my estimation. I don't think that's a reason why you shouldn't draft him, but it is a little bit more fuel to the anti-Stetson Bennett fire, which is frustrating if you're rooting for this kid, which transparently we are on this program. We're not journalists. We can play favorites here. Stetson Bennett is someone that I root for openly. Now, the pros, I think, are also fairly obvious. Outside of a combine setting, and don't get it twisted, didn't have a bad combine. Threw the ball well. Ran well. Good athlete. The pros are obvious. Two-time national champ. Didn't take no for an answer. Beat out a 5-star. Was given every reason not to come back to Georgia after going to JUCO, after walking on at Georgia, then coming back on scholarship. I mean, the ups and the downs, and he was just consistent. That's one thing I don't know we talk about enough. He had so much adversity, which we talk about a lot, but how much pressure that was on him at Georgia over the last 2 years was enormous. Because if they didn't win the national title in 2021, it would have been, man, they didn't win it because of Stetson Bennett. Man, you had all this talent on that team. You had so many guys that could have helped you. You had a generational defense, and Stetson Bennett didn't allow you to win a national title. There was so much pressure on Georgia, and he was the quarterback that got them over the hump. That many had tried, many had failed, and Stetson Bennett, the walk-on, the one that nobody wanted to start at quarterback, even after he won a national title, got them over the hump not once, but twice. Okay, that means something. I think he's going to face less pressure at an NFL franchise than he did being in Athens, Georgia. Also played an NFL offense. That's one of the things Kirby Smart said at the national title game. During the media days, he was saying NFL scouts like that. Stetson Bennett has played an NFL offense and can spit out an extensive NFL play, can do the verbiage and not get, as Kirby Smart so eloquently put it, marbles in his mouth. He can spit out the XY, dagger right, formation, play, all that, the tag. Like, he's got all that, and he's not going to get fazed by it. So from a football savvy, football IQ standpoint, Stetson Bennett's got it. He's got it in spades. Here's the last thing that I think we don't talk about enough with Stetson Bennett. Here's one of the most obvious pros to me that I don't know we talk about. Stetson Bennett, from the time that he walked on at Georgia to the time that he left with 2 national titles, just continued to get better. Just continued to get better. We still don't know exactly, I think, what Stetson Bennett's best football is. Because the last game I saw him play against TCU in person with my own eyeballs, he was darn near flawless. Some of that's on TCU, some of that's on what Georgia had offensively with weapons, but Stetson Bennett just made play after play and got Georgia in position after position and just ran the entire offense to perfection. And that was my knock on Georgia coming into the year was, okay, defense was great last year, a lot of talent. Stetson Bennett, we'll see. I think we kind of know what we have in him. Hey, hand up on me. We did not know what we had in Stetson Bennett. And that's the same thing I would say for any NFL franchise that is considering drafting him. You just don't know what you're going to get with him. He may still have even better football ahead of him. The potential of Stetson Bennett and the trend that he's on right now, I think it means something. I think it's something to look at. Because he played his best football by a mile this past season. What's next for him? We'll see. So if you're going to draft Stetson Bennett, there's 2 things that I think you got to take into account. 1, are you in position to gamble? Are you in position to draft Stetson Bennett? Do you have other insurances built in to where if it doesn't work out with Stetson Bennett, you're okay? You got more answers in the quarterback room. You've got a solid run game. You've got some things built around him that don't put too much pressure on Stetson Bennett being the answer for you. The second thing, do you have things built in to assist Stetson Bennett in his process? Because remember, it didn't work out right away at Georgia. They did everything in their power to try to get him to understand he wasn't going to be the guy at Georgia. Wasn't good enough early on. I believe that's the case. I believe he wasn't good enough when he got to Georgia, but he worked, he waited, he developed, got his shot, took advantage of it. That might be the same story in the NFL. I don't believe he'll be ready day one. Do you have a veteran quarterback that can assist him? Do you have the right quarterback coach that's willing to be patient with him and take some time with him, is committed to Stetson Bennett's progress? Is if you do, I think if you have those 2 things, ability to gamble and ability to help Stetson Bennett mature, I would take him. All right, I'm just saying, for my franchise, if I have some other quarterback already in place and Stetson Bennett understands, hey, man, you might not play for a few years, I would take him. The potential of what he could be continues to excite me with his NFL career. We've seen him progress in spades over his time at Georgia. His it factor, his intangibles, stuff you don't test at the combine. But I think it's Stetson Bennett's strengths, and I think some team, if they have the right situation for him, could hit it big. So a lot of potential, which is kind of the word of the NFL draft, but I'm excited to see what Stetson Bennett ends up becoming. And that 4th-round grade for me, I think, is right about accurate. Now, want to hear from y'all. Been tracking the live chat throughout the duration of this show. You also got to follow me on Twitter and on Instagram. We hear from y'all there as well, at JD PicKell. But you know how we do things. Bring it on now. The keeper of the queue. Man, the myth, the legend, Nick, heavy lifter break. Nick, how we doing, my guy?
I'm good. I need to put something on this mic. It's squeaking too much.
It's squeaking on you?
But I'm doing good. Got some good questions in the chat, which is where we're going to go today. First one, Hamilton Keener. Oh, excuse me. No, he was just asking. He was just in an argument with Nugs. That was a fight that went on for a long time.
Okay.
So my apologies, JD. I lost
getting chippy in the chat, man, huh?
Yes. Okay, no, I found it. It is Hamilton. Will the ACC still be around in 5 years after Florida State and Clemson join the SEC? Assuming, I guess, that will happen in Hamilton's eyes.
I think so. So here's what I would say on this: will the ACC in name still exist? Yes. Will it exist in regards to being a Power 5 conference? I don't think so. Because you have two really big pieces in Clemson and Florida State, and those two cats are bringing in most of the revenue and keeping the lights on for you. And so if you were to lose those two pieces, if they don't get the piece of the pie that they deserve, quite frankly, and the piece that they think they need to compete at the level they want to compete at, what happens to the ACC? You know, I mean, is NC State keeping the lights on? No knock on NC State. Is Virginia Tech keeping the lights on? I hope they do. I would love for them to, but the media rights deal, I think, gets a little bit funky. So Florida State and Clemson holding a lot of cards right now. The AD, Michael, I believe it was Langford, that came out and said, yeah, we got to, I think I'm saying his name wrong, Nick, but the Florida State AD came out and said, listen, we got to make some more cash money. All right? If we want to win national titles, we got to compete financially with the teams that are winning national titles, the Georgias. Michigan's in the playoff. Ohio State's in the playoff. Those schools are making $80 million. Georgia's making like $72 million a year. We can't do that if we're $30 million behind them. Not feasible. So to answer the question, absolutely, I believe the ACC will take a step back. I think in principle it'll exist. I say in principle. In reality, it will exist, but I think it'll be viewed more so in that like group of 5 genre, if you will, Nick. And I think Super Conference era is very much so here, and Florida State and Clemson are going to decide that.
Well, okay, this is a statement more so than a question. H-Town Creole, NIL and transfer portal killed the Bama dynasty, and Saban sees the writing on the wall, JD. Do you agree?
I do not believe that.
I don't either.
Yeah, I don't believe that. So he says NIL and transfer portal killed the Saban dynasty. Is that the take here?
Correct.
Okay. We don't have a 2-hour show, but we could do a 2-hour show on this. Name, image, and likeness is going to benefit operations that care about football. Both people and fan bases that support their football team, they're going to put forth money to support their athletes. Only so much of this is public, but Nick Saban came out and was like, yeah, Bryce Young's making $1 million, or more or less, or something like that. He came out and said something ridiculous for how much Bryce Young was making in NIL. If anything comes to the haves and have-nots in college football, in NIL, Alabama is one of the haves. Also, the transfer portal, there are people beating down Nick Saban's front door saying, please, let us come and play for your football team. You want to know why? Because they get developed. You get the Nick Saban stamp of approval. And also at Alabama, you have one good year. Everything you want to make happen, from getting to the NFL, being a high draft pick, and putting the right things on tape. If you have one good year at Alabama, that all can happen for you. Whereas at other schools, you might need to build a longer resume of 2 to 3 seasons. At Bama, just takes 1. So what I'm trying to say here is, just because we haven't seen Alabama win a national title in a couple of years does not mean it's ended any kind of dynasty. I would be very surprised if we don't see Nick Saban and company snap back in a very big way this coming year. Also, won a New Year's Six Bowl, like double-digit wins. So I understand where you're coming from, but I just vehemently disagree.
Okay. One more thing.
Let's do it.
This is from Brandon Reese. I know it won't ever happen, but Brandon wishes the SEC just would play a straight-up 12-game conference-only schedule, call it a 6-6 format or even a 7-5. JD, that would be in a 12-team playoff scenario a little bit more possible because teams would beat each other up a little bit. But obviously, in this 4-team playoff, we'd be lucky if we see any SEC team playing in the college football playoffs.
Seeing a 12-game conference schedule would just be absolutely brutal. It'd be fun. I think you're right in saying I don't know if it'll ever really happen. It'd be a whole lot of fun, but just from a financial standpoint, I think there's other teams that are, they want to get a paycheck, and they're very much so down to get paid by Alabama or by Auburn to come and play at, wherever it ends up being, Tuscaloosa or Jordan Hare. You hear what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot that's baked into this as to why the SEC wouldn't play a 12-game schedule. Would it be entertaining? Absolutely. I personally, though, I love that we get some of these games at the beginning of the year. Like the week one, you get USC and Alabama a couple years ago, as entertaining as it wasn't. Oregon and Georgia. I like the Chick-fil-A kickoff game and the non-conference, even if it isn't that impressive. I think also if you're the SEC, being able to play other conferences, if you want to flex your muscle and say, look at us, we are the best conference in the country, being able to go and play some of those other powers early on, I think helps your case. So I hear what you're saying. I like where we're thinking about, but a 12-game SEC schedule would be brutal. And, we'll see how this thing shakes out with the future permanent opponents. But, yeah, I'm with you there on this one, Nick. But awesome, Nick. I appreciate your man in the chat today, brother.
Yeah, absolutely.
Making it happen. Again, Nick Brake, keeper of the queue. Nick, we'll see you Tuesday?
We'll see you Tuesday, man.
Tuesday it is. Nick Brake, heavy lifter extraordinaire. Y'all, we're glad that y'all are tuned in. We're glad that you get to just take a few minutes away from whatever you're doing. Like I said, whether it's work, whether you're in college, we've got a pretty large college audience, and you're just taking a few minutes away from studying, or maybe you're studying with us. We're glad to have you a part of this. This has been an absolute blast to be able to build over the course of the last few months, and I fully believe the best is still yet to come. That is all thanks to what y'all have allowed us to do here. So we're going to keep the party rolling. We will see y'all next time.